Good morning to those of you on the West Coast and in central Canada. And to those of you in the east of this great country, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. We've gathered several industry leaders here from Canada and overseas for today's conversation, and I do hope that you enjoy the discussion. Now, each year we gather together our thoughts on the greatest challenges facing the industry in Canada, and we publish them under our banner, Bright Ideas. This year we've published 3 papers to date, which talk about the grid, risk, and human resources challenges. These are available on our website, and you can access them by scanning the QR codes on the screen in front of you now, if you'd like to do that. There's a 4th paper that we're releasing later this week, which talks about the challenges of regulation. And I'm sure we'll be sending that out to you all, and it will also be available on our website again through the QR code. Next slide, please. Now, we do have simultaneous translation in place for this call, and you can access that if you'd like a translation from English to French by following the instructions that are on the screen in front of you now, via the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen. And we also have French speakers on the line who are able to translate any questions you may have in the chat from French to English. So before we begin, it just remains for me to make our land acknowledgement. And I'd like to say that I've had the opportunity to live and work throughout the world during my 36-year career. I can honestly say there's nowhere in the world like this country. We're truly blessed to reside in Canada. And with that in mind, we acknowledge that Deloitte offices reside on traditional treaty and unceded territories as part of Turtle Island, North America, which is still home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which our Chilean offices sit and pay our respect to those owners, past, present, and future. And so without further delay, I'd like to hand you over to Gavin McTavish, who will be moderating today's discussion, and his first task will be to introduce the speakers. Over to you, Gavin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. I'll actually start with introducing myself. So welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining. My name, as Tony mentioned, is Gavin McTavish. I lead our strategy practice, Monitor Deloitte, here at Deloitte in Canada. And I also do a lot of work in and around energy transition, both with power and utilities clients, as well as large industrial clients who are grappling with the requirements of energy transition. And so I'm very excited to be moderating this panel of individuals who we're going to have, I think, a really interesting conversation with today. So to introduce the folks that we'll be speaking with, so I'll start with Robby Sohi. So Robby is the Chief Operating Officer and Vice President, Markets and Reliability for the IESO. Robby is responsible for the reliable and efficient operation of the Ontario-wide power system, the administration of Ontario's real-time electricity markets, and the continued development of electricity market designs. Robby previously served as Senior Vice President, Corporate and Business Development and Strategy at Ontario Power Generation, where he was accountable for commercial business functions, including business development, acquisitions, and electrification. As part of his focus on implementing OPG's long-term strategic plan, he and his team delivered a growth strategy aimed at broadening OPG's business within Ontario and beyond. In addition to his VP role at OPG, Robby also served as President and CEO of Global First Power, leading Canada's first small modular reactor project. He joined OPG's predecessor company, Ontario Hydro, in 1991, and over the years has held several roles throughout technical, corporate, asset management functions, maintenance, hydroelectric, plant operations, all across Ontario. He serves as a director on the board of Northeast Power Coordinating Council, and has served as a council member of the Generation Sector Council at Electrical Power Research Institute and a member of the Thermal Generation Interest Group at the Center for Energy Advancement through Technological Innovation. Robby, welcome, and thank you for joining the panel. Next, Ryan Mitchell. Ryan is President and CEO of St. John Energy. He is passionate about energy transition, sustainability, and economic development. Ryan is a graduate of NBCC, UNB, and is an alumni of the Wallace McCain Institute for Strategic Executive Program. He is a registered engineer in New Brunswick with an MBA. Ryan has over 20 years of engineering experience in diverse and progressive management positions, with most of his experience coming from the telecommunications sector, which obviously has some interesting parallels for the energy sector as well. He serves on several volunteer boards, as well as the Board of Electricity Canada and the Executive Committee for the Atlantic Hydrogen Alliance. Ryan was also recently named to Canada's Clean 50 list as one of Canada's top sustainability leaders in 2021. Congratulations on that, Ryan, and thank you for joining our panel. Next, I'm joined by two colleagues from Deloitte from around the world who are going to help us bring a global perspective to this discussion. So first, I'll go to Fiona Bishop. Fiona is a director in climate and sustainability for Deloitte Australia. She's a dynamic leader with a career spanning electrical engineering, economic regulation, customer engagement, technology, and management roles across the energy and resources sector. She joined Deloitte earlier this year as a director in our climate and sustainability practice. And as I said, she sits in Western Australia. Prior to Deloitte, Fiona served as the executive of innovation at Western Power, a distribution and transmission network business in Western Australia, serving 2 million customers and spanning over 255,000 square kilometers. There, she initiated and sponsored a range of innovative projects that have been incorporated into the state government's energy transformation roadmap. Fiona has a Bachelor of Electrical and Electronic Engineering, an MBA, and is recognized as a Tracy Horton Scholar by the University of Western Australia. I almost said Western Ontario, my alma mater, and is a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. Fiona is a strong advocate for women in STEM and an active mentor to many. And last but not least, Thomas Schlack. Thomas is our global sector leader for power utilities and renewables and sits in Deloitte, Germany. As a partner at Deloitte, Thomas is responsible for the sector globally. He advises leading companies in the energy industry with a focus on Germany and in Europe. Dr. Schlack brings years of experience in the conception of corporate and divisional strategies to his consulting projects. These also often include organizational development, cost reduction, and post-merger integrations. In recent years, he has been particularly concerned with issues relating to the digital transformation of energy companies, starting with innovations and product developments, through the conversion and new construction of digital competencies at the customer interface to the automation of business processes. Thomas, thank you as well for joining our panel. All right, introductions aside, we've got a pretty cool panel of people to be able to have what I think is going to be an interesting discussion. Before we get into it, I want to take 20 seconds to set the stage here. Our world is going through an existential challenge. The challenge of climate change, the pathway of decarbonizing through electrification, is an existential challenge for humanity. The energy sector is going to be a strong player in this. The question is the power and utilities sector and the related entities going to be a hero or a villain? Are we going to see power and utilities clients around the world be able to manage the demands of all of this new electrification load that is going to come as we transition previously carbon-intensive loads to electricity? Is it going to be able to handle that efficiently to create reasonable economics for both itself, but also its rate-paying customers, and also support industries as they transition? It's a real challenge, and one in which undoubtedly power and utilities companies are going to be at the center of. So with that as the backdrop, we've got a few questions that we'll pose to our panelists. And I'm going to start with saying, with the following question: as this transition is taking place, what capabilities do power and utilities companies need to have to be able to successfully navigate this transition? What capabilities do they have today? What new capabilities are going to be required to successfully navigate the energy transition and the substantial new load that will come with it? So I'm going to throw first to Ryan. Ryan, what do you think?
All right, thank you, Gavin, and good morning, everyone. Certainly, that was a good lead-in to the question, and I think I'll start with what utilities, have been known for. And I will say I'm a bit reluctant to make broad brush statements, knowing there are so many different structures of utilities in the sector, and certainly span a very broad spectrum. But I think it's safe to suggest generally, utilities have traditionally been very engineering, very operationally focused on providing a basic everyday amenity that most customers get to take largely for granted. And if you had a relatively stable set of rates and good reliability, then your customers probably never had much of a reason to think about you. And that was probably a pretty good place to be for a really long time. Many utilities in the past have not had to fret, much about competition, and certainly over the history of the sector, as a result, marketing and communications largely didn't require, a significant focus. But certainly now, as we look ahead at the energy transition to net zero, I believe communications, transparency, engagement with the customer is so important. Ensuring we're building trust with our customers and stakeholders as we look to evolve, and in general help improve overall energy literacy. So I see solid communications as the foundation or the bedrock for us. But then as it relates to the aspect of the question around an important capability that utilities need to be focused on with respect to the transition, well, I really believe that is it's all around agility. So the ability to pivot, to alter course based on new and emerging trends, and disruption. And I would certainly encourage thinking about agility as it relates to, people, process, as well as technology. It is going to be very difficult, to predict exactly what the future is going to look like. So certainly I believe it's most important that we focus on our ability to adapt and to be agile.
Thank you, Ryan. That's a great launch, and thank you for helping us go first. Robby, you've spent lots of time in other utilities in the Canadian context. What's your view of the things that utilities are going to need to be great at as they navigate this transition?
Well, good morning. Happy to comment on that. I'm going to pick up on what Ryan kind of mentioned around the agility piece. And in addition to that, I think, two things that are really key here are, well, first of all, it's openness to doing business in non-traditional areas for the utilities. I mean, we know what utilities are good at, right? They maintain and operate electrical infrastructure, and they do it well, whether it's building, operating, maintaining. And if you look at what's about to happen in the transformation and transition, the openness to change and being able to adapt to new lines of businesses, things like, if you look at, the infrastructure for EV adoption, right? All the charging infrastructure. Well, that's largely, it's electrical, right? Who does it best? It's the utilities who do it best. And they know how to navigate all the challenges we're going to see in that transformation of what I call EV infrastructure. And then energy management function. Who can do it best? This is going to get way more complex, and utilities have a natural advantage, and especially utilities that are fully integrated, because they go right from the customer all the way up to, generating the product and transmitting, and they can actually move faster. So on top of these two things, I think, the other piece is being nimble and flexible, right? Well, utilities have to quickly learn how to navigate areas that are perhaps maybe unpredictable in the unpredictable environment. And that's something that's not natural for utilities. If you look at the last 3 decades where we've come from, that's a muscle that they have not had to use. And I think it's going to have to be built up fairly quickly. Thank you.
Robby, and from our international colleagues, either Fiona or Thomas, any comments on the capabilities that utilities will require to successfully navigate?
Yeah, happy to jump in. Thanks, Gavin. And I think really great answers there from Ryan and Robby. And something I want to build on and grab onto there is that idea of being more innovative and customer focused. So innovation as an organizational capability, because there's this next phase now where we've piloted and we've trialed things on the network. It's a very kind of problem-solving engineering view of the world, but the networking is becoming more complex, and that's going to impact how we view risk. So how utilities are viewing the risk they're taking in their organisation, and their ability to now scale out things that were, say, pilots or trials or emerging trends. How do we adapt, and picking up on that flavour from Ryan, so how do we kind of be agile and adapt to that really quickly, to integrate the technology into the physical system and the network, to integrate that into the business, into the supply chain. And when I talk about the network being complex and a different view of risk, I probably would name that as more of it's a mindset challenge. It's like permission to play. So we have these fantastic engineers largely, and we've all learned how to play in a sandbox that's been defined by regulation and performance standards. And so we're really good at maximizing the solution that kind of fits within that standard framework. But now we have to challenge ourselves to think really differently. I can just bring that to life in an example over here in Australia that I think would be really relevant in Canada as well. Long stringy networks out to regional suppliers. So Goldfields of WA, a lot of mining resources companies, long stringy 220 kV line out to nowhere. The cost to upgrade it would far outweigh the benefits back to all customers on the network. So there's no real trigger for the network to do anything there. The cost for individual customers to upgrade it to increase capacity for miners, again, the business case doesn't stack up. And at Western Power, the team went and talked to the industry forums. They listened to industry and heard what they really wanted in terms of capacity. And it wasn't a standard always-on connection. And I think this is bringing out that bit of, we have to listen to customers differently now, and we have to meet what they want. And it's not necessarily the always-on standard. And so between the industry and between the utility, they were able to come up with this Eastern Goldfields load permissive scheme. So it's an automated scheme that's run out of the network control center. It gives power to the customers when it's available, and it takes it back when it's not. And that sounds pretty simple, but just to provide that connection service that doesn't fit the normal regulated service offering requires so many people to think differently around how can we work within a slightly different set of boundaries now. Because if we don't try and eke out every bit of capacity by thinking differently, or if we don't try and meet customers' demands in new ways and innovative ways that are still kind of following that line of the regulation, it's just going to be really hard to meet that challenge in time.
Great, thank you, Fiona, and a great example. I love that story. Thomas, any perspectives from the European front?
Yeah, I don't want to echo everything what my colleagues just said. So maybe just two thoughts. One, if I look at the European strategies of utilities, they typically reside around three things: making the infrastructure sustainable, so generation and grid, driving the product more towards solutions, so less of a commodity way of doing business, more a product way of doing business. In order to do this, becoming more of a digital company, a digital-only company. And that is, in my view, also driving then the capabilities that will be needed. So more digital capabilities within the utilities itself, also with blurring of IT organizations and business organizations. Much of these digital capabilities going forward will reside with the business itself, not in the IT departments. We see here different commercial skills being required, being able to campaign around solutions, around products. And around decision making, I would say maybe less of a controlling mindset, more of an entrepreneurial mindset, right? As the investment cycles are shorter, as we move to maybe more decentralized, smaller infrastructure, and more, not only one or two big decisions every decade, but many decisions every year, which is also, driving a different approach to risk, and it has been said by my fellow panelists before. So a lot of new capabilities required, and also given the demographic challenge that we have here in Europe, but maybe also other countries, a capability challenge that is really becoming more imminent in the next 5 to 10 years, as a lot of the staff, the experienced staff, is getting into retirement with the baby boomers, at least here in Europe.
It's a great hook, and I'm almost tempted, Thomas, to go to our talent question, but I'm gonna hold off on that one for just a moment. But I do want to come back to the panel. I mean, we've talked about innovative new solutions to be able to meet the new customer demand and listening to customers differently, deploying new technologies, not the ones that have always been used. But to quote one of Robby's numbers from the IESO, $200 billion in Ontario in the bulk system alone. Easily $1 trillion of capital infrastructure required by power and utilities clients across Canada. And McKinsey would say trillions of dollars a year across the globe to be able to meet this energy transition. This is as much electricity infrastructure as has been built in the entire history of the sector. And we have to do it urgently. Can power and utilities clients do this? Like, do we have the capabilities to know what to build, when to build it, when to start the permitting, when to engage First Nations? Any thoughts on the ability to meet the sheer magnitude of this challenge?
Maybe I'll start. It's a great question because I spent a lot of time in developing projects and business development. I think the first question: do we have the capability? The talent piece is going to be very, very challenging, and from two areas. One is just the sheer amount of volume of people you actually need to do this, right? And then of course the right skill set. Those are the two challenges, and utilities that are a bit more proactive in developing that talent, getting the pre-hires done, and getting a head start on sort of what are the no regret decisions. You'll see those utilities actually be ahead of the curve, and I think you have some data points today, right? So that's from a talent piece. I think it can be. Can we do it the way it is? Absolutely not. If we shift our thinking and get into what I call pre-hire proactive mode and focus on getting the amount of talent and the right skill set, I don't think it's too late. You've got time. And then I think the availability of capital will be, in my mind, in some cases, a limiting factor. It's just how do we sort of get through some of the regulatory framework to actually make this happen, right? And that is, I think, that's probably a bigger challenge than the first piece, I think, right? Because there's a lot of details to be sorted out. You just look at Ontario alone, right? If you look at the system that has been built over many decades, and between now and 2050, you got less than 30 years. And how are you going to deploy all that capital that fast? And where is it going to come from? That is the question that still has to be answered, right? And for this transition, who kind of pays? We're going to have a bit of a debate on that for a little while, and then eventually, when that's done, I think we can move.
Brian, I'll come to you for final words on this one before I move on to our next question. Any thoughts on the magnitude of the challenge?
For sure, Gavin, it is a significant, challenge, but I'd also like to suggest, I think it's a significant opportunity, for utilities, to pivot, to embrace, the new business models like we've talked about. And, I think Robby spoke, very well on the supply side. And I think there's an incredible opportunity to look at, the behind the meter space, like, how can we help our customers become more energy efficient? How can we introduce, new products, new services, whether it's, heat pumps, smart controllable water heaters powered by electricity, getting customers off of, natural gas and whatnot. Like, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for utilities to help support the transition through electrification and the transition. So yeah, lots of opportunity.
Great, thank you. Many of you through the discussions around addressing the energy transition challenge and the capabilities required mentioned a combination of new technologies that utilities are increasingly going to need to be deployed. Robby, you mentioned the notion of enhanced energy management and the role that utilities may be able to play in helping customers know when to best use their electricity, not just to help them save money and conserve, but also how to optimize the impact that will have on the overall grid, make sure that there's supply when it's needed. All of this requires a lot more digital capability, right? You're not providing behind the meter demand management without enhanced digital capability. You're not figuring out where you're going to need new capacity to deal with EVs without being able to model where those EVs are going to drive and charge. All of these are enhanced digital capabilities that utilities are going to require. Are we seeing utilities building these capabilities today? And what types of risks does this create as we think about the enhanced cyber exposure on a sector which is already one of the most targeted sectors by all threat actors out there, recognizing that this would have significant impact if it were to be targeted? So my two questions are we seeing enough on the digital enablement side? And how are we thinking about some of the challenges around cyber? I'll go to I'll start with some of our Deloitte colleagues. So maybe Thomas, why don't I start with you on this
one? So yes, as I already alluded to in my first comment, I would see utilities sort of needing to become more of a digital company, like a telecom company these days. And we see market leaders pivoting in that direction, and that's needed also because this new energy system is requiring new solutions that sort of the standard software providers, digital providers don't really have necessarily all ready to use, and I see still a lot of development needed and probably needed that has to come from industry itself. Now, as you said, this is providing a resilient challenge. So I would assume we see more and more utilities move into the cloud in order to protect themselves against cyber attacks and move that risk to the cloud providers and become more of a cloud native company. At least that's my vision for sort of the market leaders.
And Thomas, that's quite at odds with, well, let's just air gap everything and ensure that there's no cyber threat because nothing's connected. Is that an option?
I mean, obviously, an option for part of the energy system, or part of the infrastructure. They're highly vulnerable, but I would say the bulk of the IT of the infrastructure, 95%, would move to a cloud environment in the next years.
Okay, Ryan.
At least that's what we currently see in Europe that market leaders are pushing for. Now, in order to get there, a lot of things will still need to happen, right? So the applications that are and the processes, especially that are currently run, still require a lot of standardization and change in order to be able to do this, right? But I think if we don't decomplexify the challenge, right, because it's so big, as you said earlier, right? So we have to invest so much into the new infrastructure. If we don't decomplexify it and use digitization in order to reduce the investment bill and also make it manageable, it's very hard. It's very hard to get to that new system, I would say.
Thank you, Thomas. Ryan, how are you managing the digital shift in your organization?
Well, I think, Gavin, I would start by agreeing with you that it is important to recognize that utilities have more points of exposure than that would have existed in the past with smart grid, integration of consumer-owned DERs, more advanced portals, and energy management. And if I were to focus on to talk about possible, solutions. I think it's important that we look at establishing key strategic partnerships, with service providers that have deep subject matter expertise and augment, our own internal, cyber capabilities. There really are some excellent third parties out there. Like there's a lot of experience from whether it's defense or banking or the airlines that have been at this, for a long time. So, at least for us, we want to augment, not bring it all in-house. We just don't see how we could do that, as effectively. And so far it's worked really well for us. I would also say that, I think it's important to align with the security framework, whether that's IESO or NIST, and ensure you have independent third parties, auditing and translating those audits into executable roadmaps, with a focus on continuous improvement. It's never going to be a one and done. It's a journey. So I think the organization, and the board have to have a posture that embraces it in that fashion. And then the third thought I would have is around the education with staff. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of the cure, as the saying goes. And again, it's an area where we've had a fair amount of success in partnering with a third party and having implemented a comprehensive training program that gamifies, cybersecurity, and also incorporates, the simulation of phishing attacks, just, as an example, and something that is rolled out throughout the organization, right from the line crew right up to the senior leadership. And so, I feel like that's been a very effective, approach for us, but definitely one that we'll need to continue well into the future.
I can always tell when our executive team here at Deloitte has gone through those simulations, because people get very diligent and they talk viscerally about the experience and the emotion of having simulatedly gone through one of these cyber attacks and how impactful it is, and the enhanced diligence that it brings with it. Fiona, you've lived this at Western Power. You've gone through and helped implement many digital initiatives, both in an electric utility, and now also helping other electric utilities navigate this transition to enhanced digital capabilities. Any thoughts that you have here?
Yeah, so I'd just like to echo the thoughts of Ryan before I move on to that. The education piece is so important around cyber, and that critical management scenario rollout by executive as well. Look, there's still quite a long way to go for digital in most utilities. I think we all know that. We all want to do more in order to make the most of capabilities that are even just emerging right now, like on the generative AI front. There's so much more to be done to bring to life data that exists in pockets of the organization. And until we go cloud first, like Thomas was talking about, it's trapped in a way to make the most of, and it's definitely necessary for the strategy of organizations and for that ability to adapt, that they can harness the power of all the data they've got so that they can be modeling and scenario forecasting and bring all this magic to life. And so we do have to get comfortable with moving away from the air gap. We do have to get comfortable with playing more in this overlap of OT, ET, IT, Internet of Things. But there's been a real opportunity, I think, in recent years around things like the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act that has played out in so many jurisdictions, because it's made us all so aware of understanding our assets and where our assets are, understanding that attack surface, the vulnerable data. But it's driven a lot of awareness about the supply chain. And I actually think that's a really great front where we're not seeing enough progress in terms of digital. And so what I mean there is understanding where your supply chain goes all the way through to source. Because our ability to kind of flex and stretch now around supply chain of materials, or even if we think about that in terms of resources, it just does feel like untapped potential on the digital front to bring that information into play. We're so focused on asset information that we don't always focus on other areas of the business that need to be integrated into the whole to make the whole organization adapt now for the energy transition.
And I'll come back to a comment that I think it was Ryan made earlier that says, that said, we can't just build things the way that we built them before. We need to think about building differently. And the reality is that digital is both one of the ways that we can test these different ways of building things in digital environments and simulate how these different types of assets would work in a system environment simulated digitally. That's one part of it. Another part is leveraging digital will also help us reduce the spend, right?
Absolutely.
If we're able to manage demand dynamically, if we're able to operate a more intelligent, we're still going to need to spend trillions, but it's going to be fewer trillions than if we just build things the old way. And I think that's an important part of digital. It's not a nice to have. It's going to be an absolute requirement to be able to navigate this transition efficiently.
You're so right, Gavin. It's smoothing the path, isn't it? You're trying to eke every little bit out of your existing network to help smooth the pathway while you're waiting for that infrastructure development or the bigger changes to come along. You're trying to eke out spare capacity on your network wires, get the most out of your existing assets with condition-based approaches to maintenance and whatnot, risk-based approaches. So you need the digital tools, you need the forecasting, and you need the data around that simulation around that.
All right. I've got a great question from the audience that I'm going to just note to our panelists is there that I'm going to come to after our next one. So I'm not wanting to surprise our panelists. I'll put it into the chat for us. But before we go to our audience question, we've talked a lot about these new capabilities that utilities are going to require. We've talked about the transition to digital. We've talked about the magnitude of the challenge, the amount of infrastructure that's going to need to be built. There's a big people and talent component to this. Are we going to have the right capabilities? Are we going to have enough people with the right capabilities? How are we going to leverage the insight? Thomas, you mentioned the aging out of many of the people that are in the workforce today. How are we going to transition all of that valuable knowledge to a new generation that hopefully we can find to help double the size of our energy infrastructure? How are folks thinking about the talent challenge? Robby, maybe I'll go to you first on this one because you've seen it in lots of different contexts, and then I'll open it up to other panelists.
Sure. I think, it all starts with really understanding what the challenge is going forward. I mean, from a utility perspective, whether it's utilities or IESOs, it doesn't matter. The challenge broadly is if you look at the talent that, historically utilities have relied on, we never had to compete for that talent between utilities, i.e. whether it's a generator, transmitter, IESOs. So that's sort of emerging in a big way. We're seeing it, right? And then the same talent, the OEMs are going to be looking for that talent. And we're seeing that, starting to see some of that now, right? Switchgear manufacturers, transformer manufacturers, you name it. And then also the consulting engineering firms, right? So the talent, the exact, it never used to be sexy to be a power engineer, but all of a sudden it's become very sexy to be a power engineer, and it's going to become even sexier, right? It's that talent is going to be required. As I said earlier, the key for most organizations is to try and really get the utilities are not used to what I call this pre-hire pipeline of talent, right? Because it's always around what's your M&A cost, how are you going to recover it, and what is it for? And that's worked well for utilities for many, many decades, right? But if you don't have the talent, you'll impede the ability to decarbonize in your organization, right? So how do you sort of bring talent in and also keep them interested? The three things I focus on at the IESO is number one, provide people challenging work. And it's not a problem for us anymore with, P2D reports out the pathway to decarbonization, and people see that we can help shape energy future and decarbonize the world. That people find exciting. So that we can check that box off, right? The next piece is employee development. And I can assure you, personal scars, if we don't do this well, people will simply move around to other organizations. And that's not an if, that's happening. It's a live issue, right? And And then the third one, like I said earlier, is around really understanding the level of attrition, i.e. retirements, or people wanting to change careers, getting a good handle on that and forecasting what the need might be and this pre-hire notion and getting really ahead of that. You know, the risk always is you have a bunch of people that you've hired and don't know what to do with. I don't think we'll have that problem, right? It's going to be the opposite, actually. It's going to be the opposite around, I want to get all this stuff done. I can't get it done, right? So that, I think we just have to be, it's a very different way of thinking from a utility perspective, and it's going to take a bit of time to actually shift that thinking.
Robby, you're naming the two. It's both a capacity challenge, but also a capability challenge. And how are you engaging people, keeping them retained, and also making sure that you've got enough of the right people with the right capabilities to achieve the outcomes that you're looking to achieve. Fiona, I know you've run lots of talent initiatives as well. I'd like to go to you next on this one.
Thanks, Gavin. And I just want to start by saying the war on talent is global now. And I think when we think about the energy transition, the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, it's created this big level up moment where so many developed nations globally are looking to meet their decarbonisation goals and increase renewable generation. There are utilities all over the globe looking to expand or manage technical challenges from influx of renewable, from DER behind the meter. And we're also at a point where workforce mobility is ticking up again, kind of post-pandemic. So people are starting to move around and they're being enticed to move around because some of these unique power engineering skill sets are starting to be rare. And I think that's just worth calling out because it just changes who we're competing with. It's not people moving around amongst the utility sector in one place anymore. Mining companies are becoming energy companies. So, you know, that war on talent is really real, but we've got to view it as more than just individuals, so resources. Workforce strategies can't be one-dimensional. They've got to be continuously updated and looking at more than just hiring people. The hire ahead, yes, has to happen. The build out capability in the organisation to be a smart enough buyer. So you've got to have people who know how to engage with partners. You've got to be a smart buyer in that sense, so that you can partner, you can JV. These are all the standard things in the toolkit, the cross-skilling from adjacent areas of the business, from adjacent organisations, to build up that capacity, particularly in the field workforce. And I don't want to underestimate the importance of the white collar, the engineering, the modelling, the data science skills, but also the sheer volume of infrastructure build and competing with other infrastructure build means a lot of that blue collar pipeline has to be built out too.
Fiona, that's a really interesting point as well. The thinking about talent, not just as the number of employees that you have inside your four walls, but how are you thinking about accessing the capabilities that you need to get done what you need to get done through partnerships, through vendors, through accessing third-party talent is a critically important part of this solution. I think that's an interesting point.
It so is, and you have to think more than outside of your own four walls, and you have to think outside of bodies as well. I heard a really great example today. Electrical drafts people were a shortage. The organisation established another business, a drafting business overseas where they could find those skills just to get the volume of work through. There was still a lot of QA to happen at the back end, but we're talking about moving bigger volumes of work through. So we need to think of different ways of capacity. And I think there's some wonderful use cases coming out now around things, more of the generative AI use cases. You know, this is pretty exciting. ChatGPT, we're talking about it to get it to make my meal plans and my shopping lists. But how can you use that generative AI, that content AI, to say build together your works plans that are a lot more tailored for certain areas of the network? So find me all the asset conditions of this remote transmission substation, and then add to that, layer me in the community engagement considerations, layer me in the environmental considerations, give me a map on how to get there. build all of this information into a dossier and do it automatically. So prompt that through, say, generative AI content. So we're trying to get the work done in different ways, not just trying to find different ways to find more people, because we're going to have to be smarter than that when so much is happening globally at the same time.
That's a great point as well, Fiona. I've got one more kind of scheduled question, but I really love the question that we got from the audience, and so I want to make sure that we have time for that. So I'm gonna name our audience question, and I'm gonna name the other question that we had, and I'm gonna ask that we be a little nimble and navigate across the two. So the question that we got from the audience: as an industry, how do we enable all our stakeholders, government, customers, regulators, et cetera, to engage in an adult conversation about the true costs of energy transition? Who pays and how? And how do we assess and build into the discussion the costs of not transition? What happens if we get this wrong? I think it's a great question. It relates to the regulation question that we, as part of our regularly scheduled program, wanted to get to, around how does regulation need to evolve to enable all of this transition to take place. So I may ask that we try and twin these two together in our responses. So Robby, I'm gonna go to you first. How do we make sure that we're having the adult conversation about the cost of doing this, cost of getting it wrong, and making sure that we've got the right collaboration across all stakeholders?
Thank you. Really great question. I'd start off with, in terms of how do we sort of have everybody aligned and have that adult conversation, right? And every time, you see it again and again, when we talk about energy transition, transformation, the discussion or the dialogue, quickly turns into a debate about technologies. That's a wrong debate to have in my mind. It's because all the technologies are going to play a role. If you just look at sheer volume of what's actually required, I don't think we should be having a debate about which technology. I think the healthy debate to have is about how much of each technology from a grid reliability perspective, cost perspective, meeting the climate change. So it's a three variable equation where you really have to think about that. Because the cost issue is only coming in because we're talking about which technology is better and how do you optimize the cost. It's a wrong debate to have, because so much of the energy that you need, we can go at every technology as hard as we want. We will likely not have enough, right? So what's the point of having that debate? So I think we can align stakeholders. And we did that actually if you look at our Pathway to Decarbonization report the IESO put out, part of the purpose of that is to really kind of educate, the governments, regulatory bodies, and broader stakeholders to really say, look, this is a pathway. It's not a plan, but here are the things that could play a role. Now that starts a discussion around, we all have a starting point now, right? As opposed to somebody saying, we think nuclear is the answer, or wind is the answer, or storage is the answer. What the report says is, all these things are answers to our problems. We should move on with it, right? And the next piece is on the regulatory side. Do we need a innovation and a reform? And the answer is absolute, resounding yes, right? Because the example I use with a lot of our folks is, look, we've seen how Uber came about, and if you look in the electricity sector now, utilities traditionally and the market operators have traditionally been able to shape the load to some extent and sort of design around it. I think that's about to disappear because we don't get to ask people whether they should own an EV or not. They're going to do it regardless. And we
they may not have a choice. The OEMs are going to tell them this is the fleet that's available.
Right. And we also don't control who owns a smartphone or not. And we also don't get to control who owns an app, right? You can see where this is going. So either we can now have regulatory regimes we can react to things, or we can be proactive. When I sort of look at from a regulation perspective, the world we've come from, is really around it, developing regulation, enforcing it. The mindset we have to shift to is, how are the regulatory agencies enabling grid transformation or the energy transition and transformation? That's a very different mindset versus being in the enforcement and development of some of these regulations, right? And the problem is really twofold, right? It's short-term and long-term. If you look at long-term, we have time for, if you're talking about nuclear, hydro, bulk transmission, we have a bit of time to sort of think about how do we want to do it right. Short-term is, things that we can execute quickly. We can build wind, solar, storage, and DERs very, very quickly. So that's from an urgency perspective, that's where the focus needs to be, right? And who needs to focus on this is the other question. It's really, if you look at Energy Board, people who set the rates, who's going to pay for what? It's the first question that you asked earlier, right? Environmental assessments or permitting, site permitting. Can't spend 7 to 10 years thinking about where you're going to build the next nuclear plant. It needs to be a lot faster than that, right? And our nuclear regulatory bodies. How do you embrace new technology? Work with the technology developers to figure out how do we do this? And for example, IESOs, market operators, do need to evolve from where they are today to where we're going.
So to the rest of our panel, are we seeing these adult conversations taking place? Are we seeing greater coordination and collaboration amongst regulators, governments, power and utilities, entities? Are we seeing that happen today? Are we seeing regulations evolve fast enough to help support the modernization and transition that Robby's describing?
I would say in the last years, regulation is picking up. The IRA, the current the 14th, 5th year plan in China, setting out sort of clear targets for the economy, and then also the European Union with their Fit for 55 package, etc. And so I think there is a lot of movement. I also recognize that sort of, sometimes people can't believe the technology hypothesis that Robby was talking about, which I fully agree, that technology is not the problem, right? It's a solution. We will need most of them. Technology costs may also not be the key issue. It's more around talent, capital, bureaucracy, things like that, in order to speed up the transition. Because I believe, as we're sort of still not at the pace where we need to get to in order to build a new system, people really start questioning, is this actually true, right? Are people like us that talk about, okay, well, we have the available technology, so if you would build a new energy system these days, and maybe that's one of the big things that one would need to look to, and CO2 has a cost, which it doesn't have in every regulation. Then sort of the economic thing and the to do would be actually to build that new energy system, right? So that's nothing that sort of you wouldn't do, right? So for example, in Europe, where we now really have serious CO2 costs, around 80 euros per ton, with all the projections going to 100 and further up. In all the scenarios that we're doing, and we do a lot of scenarios, we more or less get to the same energy system with slight variations, right, around using more or less batteries in order to balance the system, or more gas fired turbines, what have you. In the end, in all the cases, it's a solar and wind dominated system that we're getting to. Having this adult conversation, I think, is what we need, right? Sort of put the facts on the table, really look at the fair prospects of these technologies, and sort of also the cost competitiveness that they have in these different CO2 scenarios, right? Maybe we need to do a better job at explaining that, right? What are the merits? What are the real problems? And again, and has been said, already a few times. It's, in my view, it's less technology. That's not the issue. It's around talent. It's around the capital that we need to deploy, and it's around the bureaucracy in order to actually get to actually starting to invest.
And Thomas, the point that I would pick up on there is the facts on the table, right? Robby, one of the things that I think that your report did was to try and put some of these facts into the public discourse to say, let's understand the magnitude of capital required and some of the challenges that we're going to need to address. I think we've got some point examples of what happens when the system fails and how much does that cost, right? You look at the billions of dollars of loss that happened south of the border in Texas when that system failed. You wouldn't have to go too far to say, well, what if we had capacity challenges and our grid started to operate like that of South Africa? What would that mean to our economy? And that's the cost of not planning and building this capacity fast enough, smart enough to be able to meet these growing electricity needs. It's a real cost. Ryan, if I go to you, how are you seeing the conversations with regulators evolving?
Well, I do see there being, an evolution, happening. I liked what, Robby had really mentioned about, there is no silver bullet to climate change. Like it is going to take, all the above and faster than we've ever done before. I certainly think there is a need for, strong collaboration. I believe Electricity Canada, the association that many utilities would be part of, is playing a leadership role in facilitating, those conversations with the key stakeholders, here in Canada. But I think it's going to continue to require sharp elbows. I do think there is an increased role for participation by various levels, of government, because, in Canada, regulation is so different across the provinces. It's not like a national set of regulation, like it is very jurisdictional based, but yet, many provinces depend on the ties between each other. So there's a lot of interdependency, between, the regions. But ultimately, I think, regulation is really, driven by policy, which comes from the elected officials. And, I think, and this is as far as I'm going to go down the political path, but I do think it would be great if we could see, increased, bipartisan development of policies that, folks in the energy sector, could have increased confidence that policies would survive, governments of the day, because, you have to appreciate, quite often utilities are looking at, investments in long life assets. And certainly you would like to have certainty, let's say, in terms of making those investments, in terms of the role that they would play, in the future. So I certainly think that the right discussions are happening, but I think if we look at where we are and with, what we need to do to address, some of the challenges, I do think the evolution needs to happen at an increased pace than what it has been happening at.
Yeah, one of the other thoughts that's provoked, Ryan, is one of the things that I think makes this so interesting is this isn't just a power and utilities problem or a power and utilities and its regulators problem. Addressing climate change and dealing with this transition is going to require engaging with the political process. To your point, the bipartisan energy policy that will help enable this, ensuring that the policy that is developed considers the impact and implications for the electricity sector. It requires coordination and collaboration with financial institutions. How are we creating new financial vehicles to pay for all of this? Because it may not all be on the shoulders of ratepayers. There may need to be other financial structures that will deal with financing some of these trillions of dollars of infrastructure. And then also, the large emitters. Fiona told the great story about engaging with the large emitters at the end of a large transmission line to say, are there other ways that we can serve your needs and help you decarbonize through electrification in different ways? And even all the way down to things like vehicle OEMs. What are the ways in which you could engage vehicle OEMs to help address some of the peak challenges and nomadic issues that are created from EVs? The challenge that the sector is dealing with is not uniquely housed within your control. It requires more collaboration and coordination across. And that's complicated and challenging. It's complicated and challenging at the best of times. It's even more so when the DNA of many of these organizations is to have been a regulated monopoly that dealt with everything on its own. And so it's a pretty tectonic shift. I'm seeing some nodding and smiling. I wonder if anybody has any reactions to that provocation.
You know, it is, I think, Gavin, I mean, it is a mind shift. As I said earlier, you know, it's about making sure from a culture perspective, it as much as being nimble, flexible, agile. Some of these organizations that you mentioned will be able to do that, and some won't. So that'll separate the proactive versus the reactive. I don't think people will have a choice to do some of this stuff. It's just the question of how you want to get to the outcome, in a proactive manner or a reactive manner, right? And it remains to be seen which ones will be proactive and which will be reactive. I can tell you from my personal experience, I try every day to make sure that we stay ahead of the curve and we're proactive, right? And hence this discussion around, you know, pathway to decarbonization report that we put out. Lack of that, you could see what conversations take place, right? If you don't have that, you essentially, even though it's, you know, it's not us just that are accountable for it, but lack of taking some leadership, what it allows is it allows that sort of individual discussions to take place, and then there's no common starting point. You gotta at least have a starting point. It doesn't have to be right, you know, and nobody's going to get it. No, actually, we had a lot of interesting debate around before issuing this report is, well, look, let's not fuss about it. We can actually study this thing more. We can refine that estimate by another 30, 40, $50 billion, but I don't think it matters, right? It's way more important to start that adult conversation about, hey, look, here's a potential path. Happy to hear feedback, happy to check and adjust. That's a much better conversation to have versus not have a conversation at all or have isolated pieces of conversations.
I agree with that. I'm recognizing
Gavin, maybe the one thing that I would add, yes, it's a tectonic shift, but it's a shift to the better. If we double, you know, the demand for electricity, yes, it's a tectonic shift with lots of investment involved, but far better doubling your industry than halving your industry. So I think it's a great opportunity with, you know, the purpose for doing this being very clear to the talent, to most of the capital markets and other stakeholders, including regulators. So yeah, let's go about it.
It's a great point, Thomas. You know, how quickly we've moved from talking about the death spiral of utilities to utilities at the center of humanity's most existential challenge. You talk about a purpose-led opportunity to attract talent and say, you want to fix the world's biggest problem? You can do it with us. I think that's an exciting change. And you're right, Thomas. It's certainly a more motivating one than how are we managing the slow decline of a dying industry. I want to give fair warning to the audience. We're at this point, we're planning on going to a few questions from the audience. You don't all have to live up to the great question that 211548 submitted, which was a great question. But if you have other questions, please share them with us. We've got a moderator that's going to do their best to field the questions and help make sure that we've got some good ones. Before we go to I'll just give the audience a bit of time to type their questions in. Yeah. As we're waiting for some of those to come in, to our panelists, we've had this conversation. You've noodled on our 4 questions around the different papers that we issued. Do you have any other thoughts that you want to make sure that you can get in before we move on to questions?
Maybe I'll share a story that after issuing our P2D report, it's about educating stakeholders and aligning. But when it's surprising to me when I talk to, people, still, it doesn't sink in. It's just a report that says, what we're going to do. But when I actually give them some data around what's reality today and what's about to happen. So the story I always use is, when we think about doubling or maybe more than doubling the infrastructure, I go back to, said, look, Ontario today has 3 large nuclear plants. One of them is about to retire. So when you think of doubling, one would think you still have to have 3 nuclear plants, plus the one you're retiring has to be replaced, right? And then on top of that, we want to phase out gas plants ultimately at some point, right? That's another 12,000 megawatts, roughly 10,000, 12,000 megawatts, right? So that's another 3 nuclear plants if you want to replace baseload generation. And when I share that with those facts with them, it's surprising how many people have the aha moment at that point, say, oh, okay, this is big.
Particularly when you add how long it takes to build those things in the first place. So it does that I think is the foundation of the adult conversation. What's the magnitude of the challenge that we're dealing with? Maybe we're not precisely right, but big round numbers, they're big numbers. And how are we going to address this? So we had a question in from the audience here. I'll pose it as a jump ball to any of the panelists that want to answer it. But what are the biggest challenges utilities are facing in developing capabilities to succeed in the future? So if I twist this a bit, what are the things that are being the hardest or that you're most worried about utilities being able to get to be able to succeed and navigate through this transition?
I'm going to jump in and I'm going to say what I get most worried about for utilities is not taking the time to think about those future capabilities, because they're already faced with a big workload. So they're already seeing the transition happening around them. And there's this, propensity then to just kind of keep on the hamster wheel. So, we have to do, we have to do more of what we already do, the way we already do it. And let's hire a few more people and let's scale up and let's keep doing things in the same way. So for me, it's about how do you actually find the space to pause and think about how to do it differently, because it does require new skills and it does require new capabilities, and you're not going to get there from just working harder or hiring a few extra people. So how do businesses have that time and that space to think quite creatively? How can you kind of carve out those innovation teams in the same way they used to go and test the tech, and now it's about building the capability and giving it that same view of piloting and trialing capability in the same way that you would pilot and trial and then scale technology. So take a technology kind of scale up then for your new capability.
That's a great point, Fiona. Ryan, what's keeping you up? What's keeping you up at night in terms of the capabilities that you're most concerned about or think are most critical?
Oh, well, there's a lot that keeps me up at night, as it turns out. But, I think I spend a lot of time, I would say, just thinking about like the culture and change management, like how do we bring the entire organization along, for the transition, and I think that's top of mind, because in some surveys that we've done, that's, that is something that has come out is, how can we improve communication and engagement? How can we find ways to get input from staff, earlier in corporate planning and more timely updates in terms of, how we're doing, and then incorporating, that feedback, into what we're up to, but not only at the corporate level, like right down to the project level. So we're just looking at ways how do we improve, change management? How do we ensure that the culture is fully on side, for the transformation that we're undergoing.
Brian, I had
sorry, Gavin.
Oh, go ahead, Thomas.
Maybe if I can add to this, I would say we need brave leadership. Why am I saying this? Because, it was said before, given the amount of work that needs to be done to renovate the infrastructure, getting in new talent, new technology, growing generation, connecting new demand, we have so many projects going on, and with the traditional model of everything sort of being in the end delegated upwards to senior leadership to then take the decision, this is not a effective, leadership model anymore. At least that's my European perspective. I don't know how things are done in Canada, but that's how a typical energy company works around here. So really, truly living agile would mean driving down the decisions in the hierarchy and making really the project managers responsible, and at the same time leadership really having a clear strategy and guardrails and saying, okay, this is what we do, how we do it, you guys are sorting this out. And we see many times that sort of utilities are not set up like this yet, right? So this would be my provocation in a way. You used the word before, Gavin, in that context, right? Sort of more brave leadership to really leverage the organization to be able to work on this tsunami of workload that is sort of approaching the industry.
And the two thoughts across Ryan and Thomas, your comments there. One is, it's not just helping regulators and governments understand the magnitude of the change, but also the organizations, right? Electric utilities have been really successful in keeping the lights on and helping employees understand, why do we have to do anything different than what we've done before? Well, the magnitude of the challenge is different than it was before. And Thomas, to your point, the way that we've done these things internally, we're not going to be able to keep doing it that way. We have to continue to innovate the way we work to be able to meet this challenge. I think those are really great points. We have time for one more question from the audience here. I'm going to go to the first one that came in. Just some examples of regulatory innovation that you think will be required to help advance the energy transition in an optimal way for all stakeholders. Are there any examples, either things that we're seeing in Canada or interesting examples of regulation innovation that we're seeing elsewhere in other geographies? Just quick hit ones, because we're coming up on time here. So if there's some that pop to mind, share away.
Maybe I'll just share, in terms of what do we mean by regulatory innovation? Technologies are moving fast, and in some cases, it might make sense to say, look, we haven't quite figured it out, but let's do a pilot. Like, for example, hydrogen. Let's do a pilot. Then we will, based on the pilot, we'll develop the regulation versus doing it the other way around. Because if we just keep focusing on, we can't do hydrogen because we haven't developed regulation yet, we'll never actually do it, right? So this is just one example, and if you look today, what we're doing in Ontario, we have a hydrogen pilot that we're doing at Surratt and Beck hydro plant, and one at one of the gas plants. And the IESO is engaged with that in terms of we're gonna use that for grid balancing, right? So traditionally we would have said, well, we can't do it. The technology is not proven. Well, when will you prove the technology? It's kind of chicken and the egg, right? So you have to sort of now be a bit more nimble, a bit more flexible, and try something. And worst outcome is you may not succeed. The best outcome is you succeed, and then you can develop good regulation.
A great example, Robby. Any other favorite examples of innovative regulation that we're seeing out there?
I would only say regulation is usually last in the chain, right? So the regulators react sort of after corporates have taken, actions, after sort of technology has been developed. So maybe one, recent observation here in Europe, the European regulator yesterday came out saying, and I wouldn't say it's an innovation, but maybe sort of putting something again on the table, which is new price zones in order to reflect different scarcity of supply and demand imbalances in order to stimulate infrastructure development, right? Sort of, for example, having a country like Germany, my country where I live, sort of not only with one power price going forward, but with 4. Now, as you can imagine, the industrial heartland of Germany in the south, which would then sit on a high price zone, island, is not amused by these regulatory innovation thoughts, right? But I think it's needed, this push, in order to actually then, you know, come up with alternative proposals. Okay, how can we avoid that by, you know, accelerating infrastructure build out and other things?
Great point. Thank you, Thomas. All right, Tony, we're just about on time, and I'm going to turn it back to you to close us up.
Thank you very much, Gavin, and thank you to the panel and also to the audience. Thanks for joining today. It's a significant time commitment, so we do hope that you've enjoyed the conversation. Just to let you know once more that you can, of course, access the articles from these QR codes or from our website. And please do let us know your thoughts. There'll be a comment form to be circulated after the event, and you could let us know how much you enjoyed the session. So once again, thank you very much to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.